Hello everyone, welcome to OTC. Welcome to OTC in Paris. We do OTC in Paris, it's a seasonal thing now, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. I can't say it's gone as well this season as it did last season, but then again...
Am I banned from future meetups?
Absolutely not. I mean, an Atlético Madrid win on the road, I think, is a rare occurrence. And
yeah, I mean that's too weird. Look, let's just stick to Paris, shall we? I mean, it's weird how so much of football is repetitive behaviour, and PSG, both pre, during, post, or during and post Mbappé, have become serial misses of chances in big Champions League games. I mean, the obvious one that we're thinking of is the semi-finals against Dortmund. Both legs, they have enough chances to win probably an entire Champions League across those two games. And again tonight, it's remarkable. You look at the stats: 26 efforts on goal, 8 on target. But I was just saying actually on TNT Sport, I didn't really feel that Oblak had to have his best game ever. What is it that's making this happen?
I mean, first of all, regarding Oblak, I'd say that I think there was one or two particularly smart saves in my mind that stick out, where if he hadn't put a big strong hand out, then maybe PSG might have been able to come away with a more positive result. That one in particular. But also at the same time, I would say that there are some underlying numbers that really need addressing. Now, one of them is that I think if it's out of managers in the QSI era who have played 10 or more games in the Champions League with PSG, Luis Enrique has the lowest winning ratio of all of them. And he got to the semi-finals of the Champions League with PSG last season, which is, I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing in itself. And I think sort of in addition to some of the games that you reeled off just there, there's a lot of matches where PSG, I mean, even when you look at sort of the Barcelona games in the quarterfinals last season over 2 legs, PSG missed a lot of opportunities in that first leg, did very well in the second leg, but only did very well when they had the numerical advantage. Obviously, they didn't have that kind of numerical advantage here against Atleti, come up against a team which, let's face it, if we're going to give Diego Simeone his flowers here, he knows how to drill a side to not concede when they need to not concede, and to grind out a result, which obviously they've done with the literal last kick of the ball here tonight. And PSG have been punished for that wastefulness. We saw them waste a number of chances against PSV earlier on in this group stage. We've seen them even miss chances against Arsenal, hit the woodwork twice, come away with a 2-0 defeat, and they're now looking down the barrel at what's going to be a tricky back half of the fixtures so far in the league phase, because you've got Bayern Munich away,
that's the next
Salzburg
one,
away, so Bayern's the next one, then you've got Salzburg, 3 away games out of 4, because City at home is the only remaining home game left, and that's admittedly against a vulnerable City right this second when we're talking. How City are going to look in January, we don't know. So that is going to be particularly tricky for PSG, I think. Final game against Stuttgart away. You don't know what sort of the stakes will be at that moment for PSG, but you wouldn't back them right now to be as clinical as they need to be in order to make it through. And when we say that, it's very difficult to sort of project towards the future, because we don't know how a league phase is going to play out, because it's the first time that any of us have seen it. Logically, if PSG can finish in the top 24 positions, which at this stage, at the midpoint of the league phase, they are not in those positions right now, they're not going to go through. But also, when you create as many chances as you do when you're PSG, logically, and so, surely, with the return of somebody like Gonzalo Ramos, you start to take some of those chances.
I mean, I suppose Gonzalo Ramos is sort of gaining in strength really by being out of this team at the moment, isn't he? The fact that everyone's waiting for him to come back. He had a much better second half of last season than he did first, and obviously there were reasons like illness, etc., in the first half of last season. But really, is this set up for him to have a really good second half of this season again? Because he's something that PSG desperately need at the moment, especially as Luis Enrique clearly does not believe in Randal Kolo Muani.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because there's times as well this season when you look at the problems that PSG have had, the problem that we were addressing at the beginning of the show, where PSG essentially just don't have enough cutting edge in front of goal. They create all these chances, but they don't have that player just in front of the goal, essentially just to knock it in for them. And it's funny because Colin Moani plays more at this moment in time for the French national team than he does for PSG. He's in better goal scoring form. He obviously feels a lot more confident there. And I think he would probably wager that he'd actually play more if Gonzalo Ramos returns than without Gonzalo Ramos, because very clearly Luis Enrique doesn't really believe in a system with this PSG side where there's a focal point of the attack. You see him experimenting game in, game out with all these different false nine ideas. Asensio, which just hasn't worked over the last 2 seasons. Lee Kang-In, which, as much as I am actually really a big fan of his, I don't think it works as a false nine. I think he's better as like a utility man or a wide man, somebody who can bring that energy when he comes on off the bench. But it's not the same goal threat that Gonzalo Ramos has, and I think the reason why PSG looks so in need of somebody who has a really prolific touch in front of goal is because Gonzalo Ramos has that rare combination of being a prolific goal scorer who has a nose for goal, will find a way to score regardless of whether it's a smart finish or whether it's a really messy tap in, but also because he has the physical qualities that Luis Enrique looks for in a false nine player. He can link up with some of the other players. You look at the 20 minutes he's played so far this season against Le Havre, provided an assist. It's not even sort of his strong point, but the fact that he's able to do that sort of thing, I think, is a window into exactly why Luis Enrique feels that he is one of the missing pieces for PSG. But I wouldn't actually say that he's the key missing piece for me. I would actually take it all the way back to the defence, and there's aspects of the defence that I quite like. I think the addition of Pacho has been very good, so I think he pairs quite well with Marquinhos. I'm just still not convinced that with two attack-minded fullbacks in Hakimi and Nuno Mendes, that you can really aspire to keep clean sheets in the way that PSG did when they had someone like Luca Hernandez, who I think at left-back or at centre-back just makes PSG much more formidable when it comes to the defensive aspect. But
you can shift across into a 3, can't you? Really?
Yeah.
If Hakimi goes, for example, you can shift across into a 3. But I guess really is the problem with that. If you're going to say rock with that back 4 and you've got Hakimi and Nuno Mendes on the other side, do you need that kind of almost Busquets figure that's going to drift in between the centre backs?
I think you do, but I also think, if Luis Enrique is really as forensic as we know that he is with his players' histories, he'll know that Marquinhos has actually done that before in the past with Thomas Tuchel and could technically play that kind of role if he really needs it. And you could argue that PSG do really miss somebody like that, and that maybe Luis Enrique is trying to groom Warren Zaïre-Emery to be like that, but he's not like that at this moment in time, and that Fabian Ruiz is perhaps not as consistent as he is at international level as we saw over the summer with the Spanish national team when they won the Euro. And you've got someone like João Neves, who, as exciting as he is and as all action as he is quite untested still at this level and is still learning. So it's a very, very tricky sort of balancing act that Luis Enrique is trying to play in order to get PSG to play the way that he requires them to play. And I think at some point, as somebody as experienced as he is, he probably needs to make a sacrifice somewhere where, he maybe does away with some of his ideals for a couple of games for the sake of picking up some points, so that PSG aren't staring down the barrel at what would be frankly a massive humiliation in going out before the knockout phase.
If we go back briefly to the goal scoring aspect of it, how much pressure is there on Bradley Barcola to be that solution? Because of course he started very, very well in Liga this season. We talked to coaches of his, and he's clearly got the potential to be a 20 goal a season guy, I think. Is it a mindset thing with him though? Because if you think of when he emerged at Lyon and he had that excellent end of 22-23 season, that second half where he provided 7 goals for Alex Lacazette, I think kind of the key's in that really, because his whole top level career up until the start of this season, and he scored these 8 goals, scored the fastest goal in French national team history, of course, here against Italy. but this is very new to him, because before he's a subordinate, a creator for more senior players like Lacazette, like Mbappé, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, we're not going to buy a centre forward, so you've got to be the man.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think there is sort of an element of sort of blessing and a curse in sort of Barcola picking up the slack that Mbappé has left since going to Real Madrid, because suddenly you have the freedom of the left-hand side for PSG, which he has done very well to exploit so far, but also you're required to sort of have the consistency that Mbappé has also added in this kind of almost I would say it's kind of like a hybrid between like a left winger and a central striker, which actually is quite topical given some of the comments earlier this week from Karim Benzema, where he said explicitly Kylian Mbappé is not a natural number 9. And I think you can see sort of a similar problem potentially developing for Barcola, where you have these games where he is absolutely on the top form, at the absolute sort of not peak of his powers, but sort of at his very best, where he's able to provide those assists, but he's also able to provide that sort of clinical edge. But in the games at this moment in time where it's a little bit harder to unpick that defence, as it was against Atletico here tonight, you lack that sort of prolific goal scorer who really has that nose for goal. And Barcola, logically, at this age, being very, very early on in his career, hasn't developed that yet. And I think that's something that can only really come with time, as eye-catching as some of his best moments have been and sort of will be in the future. I think it's still a lot to sort of ask him to sort of be the consistent provider that Kylian Mbappé was before him. And then if you're looking to the other side of the attack, in Ousmane Dembélé, everybody knows that you cannot expect Ousmane Dembélé to be that player who turns up every single game.
He's never going to be a consistent goal scorer,
exactly.
Is he?
One game out of 2, one game out of 3, he's going to be absolutely brilliant. He's going to be world class. He's going to be like he was over 2 legs against Barcelona, but that was almost just by chance that he managed to perform over those 2 legs. Over the course of a season, Ousmane Dembélé will turn up as many times as he doesn't turn up, if not more. And it's infuriating with somebody like Luis Enrique, but again, it just brings us back to this main point where you have to have somebody reliable in the centre of that attack, who is able to put the ball in the back of the net, whether it's a messy finish, whether it's something a little bit more elaborate, whether it's something in the air. And the only player in this PSG squad at this moment in time who can do that really effectively is Gonzalo Ramos. And as much as Bradley Barcola looks like somebody who is going to be able to provide for PSG in the foreseeable future, he's not got that all-round profile that Kylian Mbappé could have potentially had and has had at times. I mean, let's not be too harsh on Mbappé. He's not having the best of moments right now with Real Madrid, but he has had moments of brilliance. It might be quite far sort of in the past, but I think we can all recall how he was able to turn the 2022 World Cup in the blink of an eye almost. Almost.
Yeah, we remember that, don't we? Yeah.
I mean, I hope we all remember that. It's not that long ago. But the point being that it is a very, very difficult act to follow, despite the fact that Mbappé at this moment in time is perhaps experiencing something of a little bit of a glow down with Real Madrid and with the French national team as well. And because of his positioning on the pitch alone, and the fact that he is sort of one of the great bright hopes of French football in the future, I think it's natural that a lot of sort of the expectation, but also the criticism when PSG don't play well, falls on Barcola, and I don't think it's necessarily always justified.
Do you buy a striker in January if you lose Enrique?
I think the big question is, do you let Kolo Muani leave in order to bring in another striker? Because in my mind, honestly, I would probably be giving Rando Kolo Muani more minutes between now and the end of the year in order to see whether you really need to move him on in the winter transfer window, or whether you can perhaps soldier on with him until the summer transfer window and potentially look to cash in on him, similar to how they've done with Manuel Ugarte. However, his form with the French national team is only going to be as productive as it has been of late for so long. I think the amount of sort of smashing that his confidence has taken under Luis Enrique of late is not necessarily going to benefit him with the French national team in the next international break as it has done in the October one. And for me, I do think that from a PSG point of view, you're almost obliged to explore whether or not you can move Kolo Muani on. But if you are to look to move Kolo Muani on in January, then you have to have somebody to back Gonzalo Ramos up, because if you look at how lightweight PSG are in attack right now, without Ramos being sort of in the rotation, it's difficult to really truly make a case
and it's
for
a lot of
moving
games.
Colomani on.
Yeah, it's a lot of games as well, isn't it? Look, thanks so much for joining us as always, JJ. I've got to ask you one more question before I let you go, and maybe we go for a little beer. I think you look at the Parc des Princes, amazing on a night like this. It reminded me of like when people first told me about what the Parc des Princes was like in the 90s. So many great.
But you're biased towards Leon.
I thought you were going to say you're old, so you remember it. That also is true.
That too, but I remember it as well, which kind of worries me.
Yeah, I was going to say that there was an interesting article in L'Equipe today, and it was about the fact that the secondary ticket market for PSG has slowed up a little bit. It's a 47,000 capacity stadium at the moment, 36,000 are season ticket holders, so that's 11,000 that they got to get rid of every game. And whereas there was a very healthy secondary ticket market when you had Mbappé, and of course before that when you had Neymar, when you had Messi, that slowed down a little bit, and shock horror, you can't charge those horrendous prices anymore, which is maybe not such a bad thing. But is it evolving back to what made the Parc des Princes so good in the first place? Because really it had become a hub for superstar culture, and thus for tourists. I don't think you can get away from that. And, you know, I'm not blaming tourists for wanting to come and see Neymar and Messi. That's fine, of course. But now that they're becoming like one of the best teams in Europe, but maybe not such a superstar-focused team, does that change the atmosphere a little bit for these European nights, do you think?
I mean, I think it does change the atmosphere to an extent. I think it allows sort of, I guess, what you could call sort of like the real kind of legit hardcore fans to come back and sort of be able to represent their team. It's a little bit easier for them to be able to obtain the tickets. But I think as well, what's also nice about it, both sort of on and off the pitch, is everything's a little more organic. I mean, you mentioned sort of the word like tourists. That's something that's sort of definitely been thrown in the club's direction in the last couple of years. And it's something that I think, has enabled PSG internally and externally to breathe a bit of a breath of fresh air as well, in the fact that they're not sort of being tarred with that same brush where they're kind of pandering towards those so-called kind of tourist supporters, and they actually have something that's a little bit more wholesome, a little bit more homegrown. And sure, it is a work in progress, and they won't deny that, and I'm sure on a night like tonight they'll probably feel a little bit of frustration or a little bit of longing towards, sort of days when they had that insurance policy of an Mbappé or a Messi or a Neymar. But also at the same time, when you look at sort of what's going on in the world of football right now, Neymar, I don't think he's managed to string together more than sort of a couple of 20-30 minute appearances since leaving PSG. Messi, okay, I know Inter Miami have an impressive season in Major League Soccer, winning the Supporters' Shield and all of that. But Mbappé is not finding life as easy as people thought he would with Real Madrid. So I think many people will maybe get a little bit nostalgic towards that kind of superstar era where you still had that player who could perhaps make the difference at any given moment, when at the click of your fingers. But PSG have a couple of players who have that kind of potential. Barcola is one we mentioned earlier. Warren Zaïre-Emery on his day as well is another, and scored a goal tonight as well, very well taken. But I do think in terms of sort of drawing the fans in and being sort of really attractive, I think it's stripping PSG's fan base back to sort of the people who really truly care about the club and sort of want to be here week in, week out. And it's not the guys who will sort of come here to a Champions League game and see PSG against the likes of an Atletico or a PSV, but they'll be there in the league as well, like next home game against Toulouse, for example, the most recent home game against Lens, and they will be enjoying the fact that it's actually more accessible for them than it has been in many a year.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, as always, JJ. This has been OTC. I'm Andy Brassell. This is Jonathan Johnson. You can hear us on the podcast every Thursday. JJ's often with us from Paris and beyond. And Dot Adebayo, of course, is always steering the ship there. But do come back and join us on the Continent YouTube. You can like and subscribe below, of course, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast either. We will see you soon from, well, somewhere in Europe.